Hey guys! Tonight we are going to step off the cobbled streets of the ordinary world and join a very unusual traveling party, one led by Dionysus, the god of wine, ritual, and somehow a sort of wandering roadshow theater. Picture yourself standing in the faint glow of torches, the air warm and sticky with the smell of grapes fermenting. You hear the creak of wooden wheels as carts wobble over uneven ground, their cargo rattling, half-empty barrels of wine, boxes of masks with faces frozen in laughter or grief, and rolled-up costumes that smell faintly of goat hair. You're not really dressed for this. You're just here to listen, and maybe doze off while everyone else fusses about wineskins and flute players. Honestly, you probably wouldn't last a day in this crowd, though with their endless feasts and questionable hygiene. But don't worry, you're just tagging along in spirit. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, while you're at it, drop a comment with your location and the local time where you're tuning in. It's always fun to see who is drifting off in daylight and who's listening at 3 in the morning. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge along behind the cart, sandals scraping on the dusty road. The wheels squealed like overworked donkeys. And occasionally, one of Dionysus's companions, half drunk, fully enthusiastic, bursts into a hymn that sounds more like a hiccup than a prayer. The theater on wheels isn't grand yet. At this point, it's more like a rickety collection of props balanced on an ox cart, with a troupe of satyrs and mortals weaving in and out of the procession. But it's here, on the road, that theater, as you know it, is beginning. Not with marble stages or ticket sellers, but with movement and idea carried in wagons, pulled by animals who probably did not sign up for this gig. One historical fact you might find oddly soothing: Greek festivals often included processions, where portable shrines or makeshift stages were dragged through town. Imagine a mix between a religious parade and a mobile karaoke machine, sacred, but not too serious. People followed, clapping or heckling, depending on how much wine they had managed to sneak, and their the quirky tidbit. Some versions of Dionysus myth say he invented the wagon stage. After wandering with companions who couldn't stay in one place, rather than try to settle down, he just thought, fine, we'll take the stage with us. It's basically the ancient version of a food truck, except instead of tacos, you're served philosophical debates and bawdy jokes. Historians still argue whether these rolling performances were truly the origin of formal theater or simply one quirky extension of Dionysian ritual. Maybe it was all just a sideshow. It's meant to amuse while the real business of worship, pouring wine and dancing in circles, took place elsewhere. You picture scholars hunched over papyri, frowning at whether a wobbly ox cart deserves credit for Western drama. The procession sways onward. You can almost feel the uneven rhythm. Clomp, squeak, slosh. One goat stumbles, yanking its harness sideways, and a costume trunk nearly tumbles off. Someone yells something in ancient Greek that probably translates to, "I told you to tie it down tighter. You're glad you're just a passenger here," drifting in and out of the scene like a daydreamer. Around you, the entourage is a mix of chaos and comfort. The air smells of crushed herbs, thyme, sage, and something sharp like fennel mixed with wine vinegar sloshing in open skins. A flute trills, then squeaks when the player loses breath. A satyr laughs too loudly, startling a donkey, which answers with a mournful bray. It's both ridiculous and hypnotic. There's something undeniably human about this journey. God of wine, the one who encourages abandon, also seems to insist that art should not stay put. It must move, follow the roads, reach villages tucked between olive groves. You walk on, lulled by the thought that even theater began as something humble. Not marble but mud, not planned but improvised. And because I promised you 3 light jokes per stretch. First, the donkey you're following really does have the worst rhythm section of the group. Second, if you thought moving apartments was stressful, try moving a traveling theater every other day without bubble wrap. And third, it occurs to you that Dionysus basically invented the first mobile data plan except instead of Wi-Fi. You're subscribed to unlimited drama. As the night deepens, torches throw long shadows that wobble like drunken puppets against the roadside trees. The wheels creak a lullaby, a slow percussion that invites your eyelids to lower. You keep walking, but your steps grow lighter, your mind drifting somewhere between history and dream. You keep pace with the creaking carts until the road folds back into memory, and there, behind your eyelids, the stage resets to a flicker-lit bedroom where thunder lives in the ceiling. Dionysus begins not on the road but in a hush. You stand at the bedside of Semele, a mortal princess whose heartbeat keeps time with the storm. Zeus has visited her in pleasant disguises, warm rain, kind stranger, cozy cloud, but tonight the weather forgets to whisper. You smell ozone, see a quicksilver flash, and feel the old problem of gods and promises. He swore to show his true form, and when he does, the room becomes a lightning bolt with curtains. You flinch because you don't have insurance for divine incandescence, and because you can tell where this is going. Gods are terrible at safe reveals. The broad outline, Semele doesn't survive the brightness, and yet the story breathes. Zeus scoops the unborn child, tucks him into his own thigh, and sews the skin shut like a discreet tailor who charges by the myth. You stand there, hands hovering uselessly, thinking of practicality's thread gauge. Antiseptic recovery time while the god paces the corridor of the sky, gestating. Quirky tidbit for your sleepy brain. Somewhere in the ancient imagination, the first baby carrier is a thunder thigh pocket. Practical? No, memorable, extremely. When the divine stitchery finally comes undone, the world feels new and slightly tipsy. Hermes, nimble as a thought you almost had, spirit carries the infant away. You follow, padding down a goat path fringed with thyme, to a cave hidden by ivy and the slow gossip of water. This is a nursery for emergencies, one of many places called nice. Everyone swears theirs is the real one. A cool draft brushes your cheeks. The nymphs coo, wrap the child in soft fleece, and teach him the earliest lullaby. The trickle of a subterranean spring keeping time with a flute's patient notes. Historians still argue whether Dionysus was an imported outsider, maybe from Thrace, maybe from farther east, or a very old Greek god who simply arrived late to Olympus' paperwork. The cave, either way, is perfect for fugitive childhoods. Hera, of course, has not forgotten the lightning bed incident. You can feel the hum of her attention, like static in your hair. The nymphs move quietly, rotating watch shifts, hiding the tiny god whenever clouds gather a little too theatrically. You learn to read ivy for messages, a glint of sunlight meaning all clear, a sudden hush in cicadas meaning duck. Even as a baby, Dionysus radiates that familiar paradox. The air tastes like festival and secrecy at once. He naps with his hand curled around a sprig of vine, and when he breathes out, the cave smells faintly not of milk but of crushed grapes you haven't crushed yet. Here's your mainstream historical fact folded gently into the myth blanket. The Greeks tied Dionysus to agricultural cycles and later to the theater, and one of Athens' biggest events, the city Dionysian, was staged in his honor with processions, choruses, and competing plays. That later grandeur lives in seed form here, in the cave's soft acoustics. Someone hums a call and response tune that flickers like torchlight. The baby answers with a gurgle perfectly on beat. Yes, even his hiccups have rhythm, unlike that donkey from the road. Time in myth stretches like warm taffy. You watch the child toddle among moss pillows, bonk into a satyr's knee, and toddle again. The satyrs, shaggy and curious, visit like uncles bearing terrible snacks and excellent jokes. One tries to juggle figs and drops them all, solemnly declaring the performance a success because gravity participated. You laugh softly and tuck that away, joke one, because the cave likes a gentle giggle more than a roar. As Dionysus grows, you follow him outside to learn the language of trellises. Ivy shows him how to climb. Vines demonstrate patience by doing it slowly. He plays with a tiny thyrsus just, a reed with a soft pinnacone tip, pretending to be very official about something. You suspect all official proclamations at this age involve snacks. The nymphs teach him which plants soothe the sting-chewed mallow, which sings best when carved into a flute, boxwood if you have it, cane if you don't, and how to listen for water underground. The boy listens so carefully that you also hear it. A hush, a promise, a spring waiting under the soil like a held breath. The cave becomes a workshop of firsts. First wreath braided with ivy. First dance, a slow shuffle that accidentally invents a step you'll later see in a village square. First sip of something experimental, the juice of grapes left in a clay jar, warmed by the sun, transformed by yeast no one can see. Careful, you murmur to yourself. That's history in a cup. And sure enough, the taste is bright, a little wild, like the feeling of almost remembering a name. Historians still argue whether early Greek wine was usually mixed with water out of taste, ritual, or a practical need to avoid getting embarrassingly poetic at noon. Given this child's future, you suspect all three. Hera strikes again, as Hera does. Madness licks the edges of the story. In some versions, she sends frenzy. At others, the pressure itself, being a god raised in hiding, pushes him onto the road. You steady your breath and keep him company as he wanders out of childhood. There's an early adventure with pirates who think he's an easy ransom. Vines snake up the mast, a soft green net, and suddenly dolphins everywhere. You file that image under gentle justice. Another day in a small valley, a king is given his famous golden touch, which is beautiful for about 12 seconds and then becomes an economic nightmare. You pat the air like calming a startled horse. It's okay, we're collecting myths like seashells. We'll sort them later. Back at the cave, quiet returns, and with it, a fringe tidbit you didn't expect. One nymph swears by a bedtime charm where she knots a cord 9 times, while whispering the names of local springs. Another insists that if you doodle ivy leaves on the cave wall, the damp will bead there first, like the stone remembers the shape of shade. You try it and pretend not to notice when it seems to work. Quirk achieved. Well, childhood ends the way dawn does, so gradually that noon is a surprise. Dionysus stands taller, a garland sliding down his curls. Eyes bright with that not quite safe brightness of people who know exactly what makes them sing. He starts to gather a small following. A juggler with good timing, a flutist who stutters except when playing, a patient woman who can balance 3 amphorae on her head and never spill a drop. You help load the cart, masks, a roll of painted linen for backdrops, a little chest for coins and olives. Remember the wobbly ox cart? We're back to it, only now the props smell less like storage and more like destiny. Joke 2. The props list includes 1 thunder-resistant blanket, which you label for sentimental reasons. Before you leave the cave, you pause at the entrance. The light has that late forenoon kindness that makes everything look forgiven. You realize the theater on wheels idea didn't spring from boredom. It grew from childhood logistics, hiding, moving, rehearsing quietly, making small spaces behave like big ones. The cave taught him that echo is a collaborator, that a flicker of torchlight can turn a stone wall into scenery, and that a story fits wherever a voice and an ear can meet. Mainstream fact revisited gently. In later centuries, rural Dionysia and village demes kept processions, and small plays alive alongside big city spectacle. You can feel those roots right here, still dusty, still tender. Take one last breath of cool, grape-tinged air and step out. The nymphs wave. Hermes gives you a don't get lost eyebrow. The young god checks the cart straps with the seriousness of a captain before sail. Joke 3 arrives as a reminder from the donkey who brays like a broken trumpet and then refuses to move until someone scratches the exact middle of its forehead. You oblige, there's a sweet spot, and the whole procession lurches forward. A bedtime parade with ambitions. Down the path you go, the cave shrinking behind you until it's only a memory with damp edges. You feel the road's soft percussion under your sandals and recognize the rhythm that will carry us into lessons about dances. Masks in villages that will soon learn the pleasure of becoming a crowd. The child is on the move, and so is the stage, and so are you quietly thrilled that a god's first home was a shadowy cave where sound learned to be large. You walk on sandals, pressing into the soft dust, as the road folds into a rehearsal space without walls. The boy god, now taller and a little more self-assured, hums to himself. The tune is simple, yet it seems to lengthen your stride, as if your body recognizes the rhythm before your mind does. Dionysus carries a reed flute tucked into his belt, a staff crowned with a pinnacone in one hand, and the faint aroma of grapes in his curls. This is the time when play becomes something more deliberate, when dances grow into dramas and rituals turn into stories. You're here to watch the god of wine discover theatrics. Picture yourself in a meadow, soft grass, brushing your ankles. The air smells of honey, sweat, and the faint smoke of a shepherd's fire somewhere on the hillside. A circle of companions gathers. Satyrs with shaggy legs who can't stop giggling, nymphs who sing in harmonies you'll never quite catch, and ordinary villagers curious enough to join. Dionysus gestures, and they begin to move not polished choreography, but shuffling, stamping, swaying. You fall in line, unsure at first, but the rhythm welcomes even clumsy feet. A stick thumps the earth to keep time. A mask carved from wood is passed around, one by one, transforming whoever wears it. Here is your mainstream historical fact. Early Greek theater really did emerge from ritual dances and choral songs, especially Dithyram's wild, circular hymns sung to Dionysus. These weren't quiet affairs. They were collective voices rising into night air, sometimes drunk, sometimes not, always reaching for something larger than themselves. Historians still argue whether those dithyrambs directly morphed into scripted plays, or if theater came from a mix of influences. You stand there, turning in slow circles, feeling how easy it would be for a hymn to grow legs, for dance to tell a story. And now, the quirky tidbit. Some versions claim that Dionysus himself staged the very first costume experiment, instead of dressing in something regal. He simply threw on a length of ivy as a cloak and pretended to be someone else, half serious, half joking. His audience laughed, then copied him, and suddenly, everyone was playing roles they weren't born into. It was, in a sense, the earliest improv night, with vines instead of velvet curtains. The meadow echoes with laughter, song, and the rhythmic stomp of feet. You notice how Dionysus doesn't direct like a stern teacher. He encourages, coaxes, teases. Try that step again, yes, the one where you nearly tripped. His tone carries that easy sarcasm that makes mistakes part of the performance. You realize this is the essence of theater. Not perfection, but permission to pretend. The satyrs naturally go too far, when Prance is about wearing a sheep's skull as a mask, bleeding dramatically until everyone groans. Another interrupts the chorus with an exaggerated hiccup in perfect time with the drum beat. The nymphs counter by weaving through the crowd, singing verses that sound suspiciously like jokes about satyrs' clumsiness. You chuckle softly, joke one. Apparently, even in divine rehearsal. There's always that one guy who insists on turning tragedy into slapstick. You edge closer to the circle. A villager steps into the middle, wearing a clay mask with a frozen grin. She sways and sings, but the mask makes her voice sound deeper, stranger. The crowd hushes. You feel a shiver as the ordinary woman becomes someone else entirely, someone mythic. The mask exaggerates her features, but also seems to draw out something hidden. You almost forget she's just a farmer's wife, probably worrying about her goats. You blink, and the spell breaks. She pulls off the mask, laughs nervously, and hands it to the next participant. The sun dips lower. Torches are lit, their smoke curling like punctuation into the evening sky. You stand back, arms folded, watching how the flickering light transforms the circle. Shadows leap taller than the dancers, doubling their movements. Every gesture becomes magnified, every shuffle of the foot a proclamation. You realize how easily a story can live in shadows. The god steps forward. He doesn't need a mask. His face is already half mortal, half divine. He tells a story not with words, but with gestures, raises his staff, lowers it, twirls it, stamps it. The chorus responds with a chant, filling in the narrative. You catch only fragments: a ship, a storm, a king, a vineyard. The details blur, but the feeling is clear. Drama is happening. You sway along, eyelids drooping, lulled by rhythm more than content. Historians still argue whether these earliest performances were more about community bonding than storytelling. Were they proto-plays or just parties with a hint of narrative? You suspect both. To you, it feels like a lullaby disguised as a parade. Another quirky note drifts into your mind. In some villages, traveling groups actually carried portable wooden platform-steeny stages that could be unfolded for these rituals. Imagine someone shouting, "Quick, grab the fold-out stage," while another person struggles with a wobbly leg. You can almost hear the clatter of wood, the muttered curses, the triumphant cry, when the thing stands upright. Joke 2. It's the ancient version of IKEA furniture, except the instructions are sung by a drunk chorus. The meadow grows louder, then softer, then louder again. Dancers stumble, masks are swapped. Wine flows like water that forgot to stay sober. You notice how even mistakes become part of the charm. A satyr sneezes mid-song. The chorus incorporates it as a dramatic achoo in unison. The audience laughs, and somehow the story keeps going. Theater, you realize, is born not in flawless performance, but in the willingness to continue. You glance upward. Stars blink awake, curious spectators. Somewhere out there, Hera scowls, but even she cannot erase the rhythm pulsing in this meadow. Dionysus, staff planted in the earth, grins at the chaos. He doesn't tame it, he lets it breathe. That's the secret. You breathe too, slow and deep, as if your body is learning the same lesson. Joke 3 arrives as a satyr tries to bow dramatically, trips over his own hooves and lands face first in a basket of figs. He pops his head up, cheeks stuffed like a squirrel, and declares, muffled, "This is exactly what I meant to do." The crowd roars, and you smile, knowing that centuries later, slapstick will still work. The night winds down. Masks are stacked neatly, props gathered, torches doused. The meadow quiets, leaving only cricket song. You walk alongside the departing troupe, steps light, thoughts hazy, theatrical seeds have been planted. Tomorrow, someone will retell what happened, exaggerating here, omitting there, and the story will stretch like grapevines toward the next village. You close your eyes briefly, imagining the echoes carrying forward through time, till they bloom into tragedies, comedies, and the kind of plays that still fill theaters today. The road winds downhill, and you hear laughter before you see the cause. A group of figures trots along, their silhouettes lopsided in the moonlight. They are Dionysus' favorite companions, the satyrs, half human, half goat, all mischief. You rub your eyes, certain the wine fumes in the air are playing tricks. But no, there's definitely one with shaggy legs, a crooked grin, and a flute dangling from his neck. He blows a note badly, then bursts out laughing as if the mistake were the punchline. You shuffle closer, sandals brushing against scrubby grass, and notice their antics. One satyr balances a wineskin on his head like a crown, swaying from side to side with an exaggerated air of royalty. Another tries to juggle amphiri, only to trip over his hooves, sending a jar rolling into the dust. The group erupts in howls of laughter. You smile, because really, what's the point of a traveling theater without comic relief? Here's a mainstream historical fact to anchor you. Satyrs weren't just mythological characters. They also became stock figures in ancient Greek drama, plays called satyr plays, which followed tragic trilogies at festivals. Were rowdy, humorous interludes, full of slapstick, innuendo, and rustic wisdom. Historians still argue whether these plays were invented to lighten the mood after heavy tragedies, or whether they reflected older, rural traditions of baldy humor tied to fertility rites. Either way, the goat-legged chorus shuffles into history, hooves clattering on the stage before vanishing back into myth. The quirky tidbit, some scholars point out that the word tragedy itself may come from tragwedia, meaning goat song. Picture it, a contest where the prize might have been a goat, and the chorus sang in goatskins, bleating half seriously. You look at the satyrs dancing around you now, and it suddenly feels perfectly reasonable. Who wouldn't belt out a tune for a free goat? The satyrs swarm around Dionysus like children around a campfire leader. He doesn't shoo them away, he joins their rhythm. One moment, he claps a beat, the next he's stomping along, vines shaking loose from his staff. You follow, amused, as the whole procession becomes a rambling performance with no script. A satyr leaps onto the cart, pretends to be a tragic hero, and immediately forgets his lines, mostly because he never had any. Another ties grape leaves into a makeshift toga and delivers an overblown speech about the sorrow of an empty wine cup. The crowd, what little audience gathers along the roadside, cheers, claps, and tosses figs. Joke 1 arrives when a satyr offers you a sip from his wineskin. You decline politely, but he insists. You cave. Take a tiny sip, and discover it tastes like someone mixed grape juice with goat sweat. He beams proudly as though you've just sampled a vintage worth praising. You nod, whispering to yourself, "Oh yes, very." Rustic night deepens. The satyrs get louder. They dance in circles, hooves kicking dust clouds that catch the torchlight, making the air shimmer like gold powder. You can't help but laugh as one particularly clumsy satyr attempts a handstand, only to collapse in a heap, rolling until he lands at Dionysus' feet. The god simply raises an eyebrow and hands him a mask. The satyr puts it on upside down and continues performing without hesitation. Theater, it seems, has no rules except persistence. Historians still argue whether satyrs in drama represented wild forces being domesticated by the stage, or whether they preserve the raw essence of Dionysian ritual. You watch them, and it seems obvious. They are both. They are chaos, but they're also the reminder that laughter itself can be sacred. Joke 2 slips in when you realize the satyrs' music is basically the world's earliest garage band. One bangs on a broken amphora like a drum, another plucks an out-of-tune lyre, and the flutist keeps squeaking like a goose. Somehow together, it's not terrible. You tap your foot, grudgingly admitting you've heard worse on modern radio. The night grows softer. You walk with them through olive groves, the leaves silver under starlight. The satyrs begin to tire, but even their yawns are dramatic, like stage exits. One curls up under the cart, muttering a soliloquy in his sleep about the unfairness of small pillows. Another snores loudly enough to provide percussion. Dionysus lets them rest, eyes glimmering with the contentment of a god who knows his troupe will always provide comedy on demand. Then comes the fringe tidbit. In some stories, satyrs weren't always mischievous, but could be wise guides. One named Silenus was said to be Dionysus' tutor, older, drunker, and full of odd wisdom. Imagine a mentor who constantly dozed off mid-lecture, but occasionally muttered profound truths. It's like the best thing for humans is not to be born. You shake your head, thinking that's either the deepest philosophy or the grumpiest hangover ever recorded. The satyrs shift in their sleep, snorting and mumbling out. One dreams aloud, whispering about cheese wheels the size of shields. You tuck that detail away, Joke 3, because apparently, even in dreams, satyrs think with their stomachs. The road stretches quiet now, but the echoes of laughter linger. You step carefully around the sprawled bodies, grateful for the comic interlude. The journey with Dionysus is never just solemn ritual. It's also about joy, silliness, and the comfort of knowing not every performance has to be polished. Sometimes, it's enough to trip over your own hooves and make the crowd laugh until they forget their troubles. You take one last look at the satyrs, curled up like children after a carnival, and continue walking beside Dionysus. The torches gutter, the stars lean closer, and you realize that in the mix of chaos and comedy, the seeds of theater are still growing. You smile, let your shoulders relax, and drift deeper into the night. The procession rolls onward, wheels squealing in protest, until you notice something curious. The cart itself is no longer just a cart. Rough planks nailed into its sides form a makeshift platform, and someone has tied up a linen sheet across the front, like a curtain. A donkey trudges forward, utterly unimpressed by the fact that it is hauling the world's first mobile stage. You rub your eyes, wondering if fatigue is playing tricks. But know the traveling troupe has indeed turned their wagon into a theater on wheels. You pause in the dust, leaning on your staff, as the satyrs and villagers clamber up onto the platform. One stands at the front, arms wide, pretending to be a tragic hero. Another ducks behind the curtain, only to pop his head out at the wrong time, grinning sheepishly. The audience, scattered farmers, children chasing chickens, a curious shepherd gathers along the roadside. They watch, amused and half bewildered, as the rolling stage lurches to a stop and the show begins. Mainstream historical fact to tuck into your blanket of drowsy knowledge. Early Greek theater very likely grew out of processions and improvised performances on portable stages. Archaeologists and classicists have pointed to wagon plays in rural festivals. Simple carts rolled into town squares as the ancestors of later stone amphitheaters. Historians still argue whether these wagons were central to Dionysian ritual or just practical solutions for communities without permanent theaters. Either way, the cart before you feels like history in motion, squeaking and wobbling toward destiny. And the quirky tidbit? Some scholars suggest these carts weren't just used for drama, but also carried effigies of Dionysus himself during festivals. Imagine a giant wooden figure of the god decked in ivy and gold, lining down narrow lanes while villagers sang and occasionally tried not to trip over chickens. You look at the cart now, half stage, half shrine, and it suddenly makes sense. Why not let a god ride shotgun in a pageant wagon? The actors begin their play. The satyr plays a king wearing a crown made from grape leaves. His proclamation loud and wobbly echoes across the field. Behind him, another satyr pretends to be a messenger, only to deliver his lines in the wrong order, forcing the chorus to improvise. Dionysus watches from the side, laughing softly, as though chaos is part of the script. Maybe it is. You lean against the cart, lulled by the rhythm of words. the warmth of torches, and the soft, silly inevitability of things going wrong. Joke 1. One satyr, cast as a noble guard, is clearly asleep standing up. He snores between lines, and when prompted, blurts, "Yes, my king," at exactly the wrong time. The audience roars, and Dionysus claps as though brilliance has occurred. The donkey, to its credit, does not bolt during the performance, though it eyes the chorus suspiciously. You notice how the animal's slow breathing becomes part of the background, a metronome of patience. The cart wobbles when actors jump too enthusiastically, forcing the chorus to adjust their movements. The wobble becomes rhythm, then rhythm becomes dance. You realize the stage itself is performing, creaking in harmony with the troupe. Historians still argue whether wagons like these could truly support extended performances, or whether they were just symbolic props in themselves, meant to signal Dionysus' arrival. Standing here, you can almost feel both arguments at once. The cart is rickety, but alive. Its wheels carry not just wood, but the weight of ideas rolling from one village to the next. As the performance unfolds, villagers laugh, clap, and occasionally heckle. One boy shouts, "The king forgot his crown," and the actor, unfazed, replies, "The tax collector pawned it." The crowd bursts into laughter, and you see how theater thrives on mistakes. Joke 2 emerges when the curtain slips free of its rope, falling over the satyr king mid-speech. He flails beneath the sheet, muffled voice crying, "A ghost has attacked." The chorus improvises a chant to banish the spirit, waving their arms dramatically until the curtain is tied back. The villagers are delighted. You think to yourself, Ghost X Machina definitely underappreciated in modern productions. The air smells faintly of olive oil lamps, mixed with the sweetness of spilled wine. Torches sputter, the audience shifts, and the play continues. You find yourself drifting in rhythm with the rolling laughter, eyelids heavy, heart light, and here, as a fringe tidbit. Some believe that these mobile performances were partly designed to keep Hera at bay, moving constantly so that the jealous goddess couldn't find Dionysus' followers easily. Whether true or not, the wagon feels like a charm against stagnation, always rolling, never settling, carrying laughter like a shield. You sit down in the dust, knees creaking like the cartwheels, and let the performance wash over you. A satyr delivers a mock tragedy about a vineyard destroyed by goats, only for another satyr dressed as a goat. Naturally, to interrupt with exaggerated bleats, the tragedy dissolves into farce, and the chorus joins in, stomping their hooves until the cart nearly tips. Dionysus laughs the loudest, clapping his hands to the beat. Joke 3 arrives when one villager, emboldened, climbs onto the cart to join the chorus. He forgets his lines instantly, panics, and blurts out, "I'm just here for the figs." The troupe embraces him anyway, chanting his line as if it were a sacred refrain. For the rest of the play, every time someone forgets a word, the chorus shouts, "Figs," and the audience collapses into giggles. You smile, knowing you've just witnessed the birth of a running gag. The performance winds down, masks are removed, and the wagon creaks forward again, carrying its props and players into the night. The villagers drift home, yawning and chuckling, while the stars blink approvingly overhead. You walk beside the cart, soothed by the thought that art doesn't need marble stages to thrive. Sometimes all it takes is a rickety wagon, a few masks, and the courage to make mistakes in public. The donkey brays once, loudly, as if demanding an encore. The troupe laughs, Dionysus bows, and you keep walking, the rolling stage fading into the darkness like a lullaby on wheels. You arrive with the troupe at the edge of a city that already hums like a hive at dusk. The scent hits first grapes crushed underfoot, smoke from street braziers, and the little sparks of frankincense curling up from house shrines. Drums bounce between the narrow walls, joining flutes and laughter into one long ribbon of sound that wraps around your shoulders. It's festival night, and Dionysus leads you into streets that feel like vineyard rows turned upright vines overhead. Garlands strung from balcony to balcony, leaves brushing your hair as you pass. The Cartha Theater on wheels you've come to trust rolls a little prouder, as if it knows it will have an audience bigger than chickens and a sleepy shepherd. Even the donkey lifts its ears, finding the beat better than it did back on the dusty road. Vendors shout softly for once. You drift past baskets of figs, the running gag has escaped the wagon. A ferry stacked like patient soldiers, and platters of warm bread slicked with oil. Women knot ivy into each other's hair. Boys carry little lanterns shaped like ships. A chorus of older men debates loudly whether the wine is too thin or just enough to encourage respectable improvisation. You register the phrase, "Gladly respectable improvisation is your favorite kind." As the procession enters the square, a wave of clapping shushes and then swells, a tide coaxing performers toward an unseen shore. Here's your mainstream historical fact to tuck into your sleeve. Athens. Another Peleus celebrated festivals in honor of Dionysus' rule, and urban Dionysus rule processions. Sacrifices, choruses, and dramatic competitions unfolded in public view. Streets became stages, and vineyards spilled into plazas, each citizen both spectator and participant. Historians still argue whether these festivals were primarily religious rites that merely tolerated drama or civic spectacles that strategically borrowed religious energy to bind the city. You feel both at once as you pass under a wreath laid in arch. Prayer braided with performance, ritual stitched into applause. A priest of the god raises a small statue, perhaps the same kind of effigy once trundled on a cart stand. The crowd murmurs. Someone anoints the head with oil, someone else smokes the air with resin. Dionysus stands slightly apart, amused, as if attending his own surprise party, pretending not to notice he is the reason for the cake. The troupe halts, and the cart's linen curtain flutters with the breeze. You notice a few new props. A tiny vine trellis, a toy ship mast, for when pirates inevitably show up, and yes, the thunder-resistant blanket you labeled sentimental. It has become a mascot, draped over a chest, like a sleepy cat. The square transforms by increments. Torches crown the perimeter. A chorus warms up with a rolling chant, syllables tumbling like grapes into a press, and the sound rises into the night. There's a generosity in the air, strangers passing cups to strangers. A baker sharing sesame biscuits with a boy whose lantern has gone out. The donkey plants itself like a dignitary and receives head scratches from a toddler who declares it chief of drums. You nod. For once the rhythm section is competent. The troupe unfurls the platform. The first piece is not a play, but a procession within the square is slow. Spiraling dance around an altar swaddled in vines. Masked singers file past, dropping barley, figs, and little clay figurines into baskets. A satyr, notably sober, clears his throat and recites a blessing so earnest the crowd softens around the edges. Then he trips on the altar step, catches himself with a flourish, and invents a bow so grand the square applauds. That is joke one. The holiest moment is saved by a well-timed stumble and a face that says, "I absolutely planned that." You take in the festival like a traveler inhaling a new climate. Balconies serve as box seats. Rooftops host small choruses echoing whatever happens below. The smell of wine grows denser as someone taps a cask. The sound of laughter lifts when a boy surprises everyone by mimicking the chorus perfectly from behind a column. The cart is ready, but the entire city is already performing. You sense the deep trick of Dionysian celebration. It persuades the town to become a theater without ever saying the word. Here comes the quirky or fringe tidbit, carried to you on gossip thin air. Some say that, during certain festivals, a jar of new wine was buried and later dug up in a little ceremony, as if resurrecting joy itself. Others whisper about a ceremonial marriage between the god's symbol and a fig tree, and orchards vow to keep dancing in sap. You don't swear by either tale, but you feel the poetry of them, like a hush under the music. The cart's curtain lifts, and a chorus of townsfolk farmers. Sailors just in from the harbor, two women with flowers still dusting their forearm steps onto the platform. They've learned a simple piece over the last few days from the troupe, a hymn that unspools into dialogue. The satyr king from our roadshow bows to the audience and yields center stage to a fisherman who has never acted in his life and is now inexplicably playing a vineyard spirit. He does fine until the mask slips down his nose and he can't see, delivering his line to the trellis instead of the crowd. The chorus covers him by turning toward the trellis too, chanting as if the plant requires a formal salute. The audience approves. Improvisation, once again, is respectable. Historians still argue whether women could actively perform on stage in this era. or if their festival roles were carefully bounded to processions and choruses off the formal dramatized space. You feel a complexity in the square's choreography. Here, in the porous edges of celebration, boundaries loosen. A baker's wife steps forward, sings a solo that makes the torches lean in, then retreats to hand out bread with the steady smile of someone who has pies in the oven and an audience in her pocket. A row of children carries little branches, shaking them so the leaves whisper like rain. The donkey flicks an ear in appreciation. The troupe folds a tiny scene into the chorus 3 lines about a lost goatskin and a found cup-end. Then the square erupts into call and response. What was lost? The goatskin. What was found? The cup. Joke 2 is baked right in. A satyr ad-libs, also my dignity, and the chorus answers, not tonight, in perfect unison. Oh, somewhere above you. A night breeze ruffles ivy and brings down a sprinkle of petals that stick to your hair like confetti making long-term plans. Between pieces, vendors navigate the crowd with trays of olives and cheese. A young man swaps his cup with yours by accident, takes a sip, blinks, and whispers, yours is better. You shrug, Drade accepted. The square feels like a table with too many seats and not enough plates, yet everyone somehow gets fed. The cart rolls a hand's breadth to adjust sight lines, and the linen curtain ripples, becoming a sail, then a cloud, then a moonlit hillside, depending on who tells it what to be. Now the debate you've been sensing returns, gentle as surf. Historians still argue whether the festival's rowdy license masks, jokes, hung garlands serve to release tension harmlessly or to sharpen a community's shared identity by poking at its edges. You watch the chorus tease a local official about taxes, and the official bows, smiling as if he's been let off easy for sins he hasn't yet committed. Laughter here is medicine with a pleasant aftertaste. Joke 3 strolls in when a troop member hoists the toy ship mast for a pirate vignette and accidentally whacks the thunder assistant blanket. It slumps over his head like a dignified ghost. Without missing a beat, he haunts the stage for 2 lines, mutters, I prefer overcast, and the square dissolves into giggles. Even the priest hides a smile behind his sleeve. By now, the city is warm with togetherness. Distant rooftop flute trades phrases with the chorus below. They braid into something like a lullaby without losing the pulse of the dance. The vines above you tremble once as though nodding to the rhythm. You rub at a smudge of grape on your wrist and taste it idly sweet. Not yet wine, a promise rather than a verdict. Somewhere in the crowd, a gray-haired woman repeats the figs. Refrain from last night's roadside show, and an entire cluster of children answers her, delighted that jokes can travel farther than wagons. Here's one more quiet glance at the facts beneath the festival glitter. Civic leaders will award prizes tomorrow, judges seated in honor rows will pretend to dislike being noticed, and the names of winning poets will be etched into memory. But for this hour, you float in the earlier layer streets as vineyards. Citizens as chorus, and the gods strolling like a guest of honor who keeps helping in the kitchen. You close your eyes, let the chant rise and fall, and feel how the city's heartbeat syncs with your own, steady and sleepy. When the torches burn low, and the last calandra response fades, the troupe gathers the masks, folds the curtain, and coaxes the donkey forward. The square becomes a square again, but it hums with after music. A baker yawns. The priest covers the little statue with a cloth. You tuck a vine leaf behind your ear for later, and step into the alley's cooler air carrying with you the small proof that a festival is not a break from life, but life rehearsing how to be joyful. The road narrows again, drawing you out of the city's glowing square and back into olive groves silvered by moonlight. The donkey pulls the wagon with a grunt, and the troupe, still buzzing with festival energy, sings half-remembered choruses. You trail behind, sandals whispering in dust, when Dionysus slows the pace and begins rummaging in one of the carts. Out comes a bundle of clay masks, long-nosed, wide-eyed mouths, stretched in frozen expressions. He hands them out casually as though offering figs, and suddenly you're re-surrounded by faces that don't quite belong to the people wearing them. You take one in your hands. Its clay is rough, still carrying the fingerprints of the craftsman. The expression is exaggerated, the kind you'd expect to see from 3 fields away. You slip it on, and the world changes. Sound muffles, your breath warms your cheeks, and your voice drops into something you hardly recognize. It's disorienting yet soothing, like being allowed to step aside from yourself for a moment. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Masks were central to ancient Greek theater, amplifying voices through built-in mouthpieces and signaling character roles to large audiences. They allowed a handful of actors to play many parts, shifting identities at will. Historians still argue whether these masks originated purely in ritual dances for Dionysus, or whether they borrowed from older folk traditions' funerary rites, shamanic disguises, or seasonal festivals where whole villages pretended to be spirits. You run your fingers along the clay edge, thinking, perhaps it was all of the above. The quirky tidbit comes in as one satyr, fumbling with his mask, accidentally puts it on backward. The eyes face the back of his head, giving him the look of someone constantly watching his own mistakes. He stumbles into the group, arms out like a blind man, and declares solemnly, "I see everything, except walls." The troupe collapses into laughter, and the donkey heaves what you swear is a sigh of disapproval. The masks, though, aren't all comedy. One villager slips on a long, sorrowful face, and the mood changes. His voice deepens, the chorus hushes, and for a moment the laughter ebbs. You feel the weight of that expression, how a single mask can turn an ordinary man into a vessel for something heavier than himself. The air grows cooler, and torchlight catches on the painted clay, making shadows twitch. Joke one slips in naturally. A satyr whispers, "If I keep this mask on, maybe Hera won't recognize me." And another replies, "She'll still smell the wine." You wander around the wagon, watching how each mask creates its own atmosphere. A woman dons a wide grinning face, then immediately begins scolding the donkey as though she's its long-lost mother. A boy with a tragic mask shuffles melodramatically until he bumps into a tree and mutters, "Even the olive groves betray me." The group treats each accident as part of the performance. Theater on wheels means rehearsal never ends. Even mistakes are folded into the fabric. Historians still argue about the symbolic power of masks. Were they meant to summon the presence of gods, to dissolve individuality, or simply to amplify storytelling? You feel all three at once? When you wear a mask, you're lighter, freer, unburdened by yourself. You understand why Dionysus smiles as his troupe swaps faces. Masks free mortals from the smallness of being only one person. Joke 2 arrives when a mask slips off mid-dance and lands squarely on the donkey's face. For a glorious minute, the animal stares at you with a tragic frown, ears poking through the clay. The troupe howls with laughter until someone gently removes it. Though you suspect the donkey performed better than half the satyrs tonight, the masks become teaching tools. Dionysus lines everyone up and demonstrates how each expression demands a different walk. The tragic mask drags its feet. The comic one bounces. The satyr mask stumbles as if tipsy even when sober. You mimic the steps, surprised how quickly your body follows the mask's suggestion. You realize that performance lives in movement as much as in voice. The quirky tidbit that lulls you deeper into thought. Some masks, archaeologists say, were painted with exaggerated wrinkles or bald patches, marking stock characters like Old Man or Grumpy Neighbor. Imagine ancient audiences laughing knowingly. The same way you might smile at a sitcom character whose flaws never change. The idea that masks carried social archetypes makes you oddly sleepy. It's comforting to think even in antiquity, people loved familiar jokes. Joke 3 emerges as one satyr, wearing a mask of eternal sorrow, announces grandly, "Alas, I have dropped my cup of wine." Another, in a grinning mask, immediately offers his own cup. Empty of coarse sand, the tragic satyr gulps theatrically before spitting dust. The chorus chants, "A tragedy indeed," and everyone claps. You shake your head, chuckling as the troupe continues down the path. The night grows thick with stars, and the masks glow in torchlight, their faces frozen but alive in motion. You feel your own mask's clay edge pressed gently against your skin, blurring the line between you and not you. The cart creaks forward, and you hear the overlapping voices of the troupe, some solemn, some silly, transformed by their chosen face. The air smells of earth and olives, the sound of hooves steady as a lullaby. Take off your mask at last, holding it by the strap. Your face feels lighter, as though you've borrowed someone else's dreams for a while and given them back. The masks are packed carefully into the wagon, but their presence lingers. Even without them, everyone still carries the shapes of those expressions in their bodies, laughing, sighing, pretending, remembering. You realize that masks don't just hide, they teach you how to see differently. The procession continues, quieter now, the humor dimming into a sleepy rhythm. You trail behind, eyelids heavy, imagining 1,000 masks hanging on invisible pegs in the night sky. Waiting for the next village, the next chorus, the next dream. The wagon rattles on until dawn paints the hills with that honey-colored glow that makes every olive tree look older than it really is. The satyrs yawn, masks dangle from straps, and Dionysus stretches like a cat as if he has already slept through the night while marching beside you. Ahead lies a small farming village, perched between vineyards and a stretch of stony coast. Chickens scatter as the cart rolls in. You glance at the villagers. Weather-lined faces, hands calloused from vines and nets, eyes curious but cautious. These are not trained actors, nor priests, nor satyrs. They are just ordinary Greeks. Yet tonight, they will join the play. You lean against the wagon while Dionysus greets them, not with thunderbolts or lofty speeches, but with a grin, a song, and an offer of wine. Children run forward first, tugging at the donkey's tail, then shyly hiding behind their mothers. Old men shuffle closer, claiming they've seen everything, but their eyes glitter like boys when handed a mask. The troupe sets up a small stage with nothing more than planks on barrels, but the villagers don't seem to care. They know the performance will not happen to them, but with them. Hear us. Your mainstream historical fact. Rural Dionysia festivals were community events where villagers participated in choruses, cave processions, and improvised performances. It wasn't only the polished playwrights of Athens who shaped theater. Countless anonymous farmers, sailors, and women weaving garlands contributed. Historians still argue whether rural festivals served as the true root of Athenian drama, or if they were simply rustic echoes of more formal city celebrations. You see both possibilities unfolding now. A little stage that feels both humble and enormous. The quirky tidbit arrives as a fisherman, still smelling of salt and squid, is coaxed into singing a dithyramb, clears his throat, looks terrified, and then belts out a hymn so unexpectedly tuneful that the satyrs stop mid-joke to listen. When he finishes, he bows awkwardly, muttering, "I usually only sing to the fish." You clap anyway. That's one way to keep audiences captive. Joke one blossoms when a goat escapes its tether, charges the makeshift stage, and stands there chewing a mask. The chorus doesn't break character, they simply chant. The oracle has spoken. The villagers laugh until tears streak their dust-worn cheeks. The villagers themselves are transformed. A farmer's wife puts on a smiling mask and, for the first time, raises her voice in song beside the nymphs. A boy is handed a wooden staff and told he's now a herald. He marches proudly, announcing nonsense decrees about larger grape rations. The chorus answers him with solemnity, as though the law has indeed changed. Theater is no longer an art form reserved for gods and professionals. It has seeped into daily life like rain into thirsty soil. Historians still argue about the inclusivity of these festivals. Did women truly act, or did they only sing in choruses? Were slaves allowed to participate, or only to watch from the shadows? You watch now as a shepherd's servant steps nervously into the circle, mask trembling in his hands, and Dionysus nods with encouragement. The servant speaks his lines, simple ones about guarding sheep, and the crowd cheers. You can almost feel the boundaries soften. Joke 2 comes when the donkey, clearly jealous of the goat's earlier success, plants itself at center stage and refuses to move. A satyr improvises, declaring the beast the oracle of stubborn wisdom. The donkey brays once, as if on cue, and the crowd roars approval. Someone tosses it an olive branch, which it promptly ignores. The performance becomes less a show than a village dream shared aloud. A chorus of women sings about weaving while they actually spin thread on stage. A fisherman mimes rowing, joined by a satyr, pretending to be a very unhelpful dolphin. Children skip in circles, chanting rhymes that make no sense but sound ancient anyway. You sit back, realizing that, for this night, everyone is performer and audience at once. Another quirky tidbit whispers in, archaeologists have found little terracotta figurines from rural Greece miniature masks. Dancers and musicians which may have been offerings from ordinary festival participants. We imagine the woman who sang tonight leaving a tiny clay singer at a shrine, a quiet thank you for the chance to be heard. Joke 3 sneaks in when the fisherman tries acting again, but forgets his line. Panicked, he blurts out, "The fish ate my words." Without missing a beat, the chorus chants back, "Then we shall fry them." The crowd howls, and the mistake becomes the highlight of the evening. As the night settles, villagers and troupe alike collapse onto woven mats, still humming refrains. The masks are stacked beside baskets of figs and olives, indistinguishable from everyday objects now. You lie back, watching stars wheel overhead. Realizing that Dionysus Docenti just bring theater to people, he invites people to discover that they've been actors all along. Even the donkey snores like a chorus bass, and the goat still chewing a mask finally drifts into sleep. The festival fades into silence. The memory lingers like the taste of watered wine. Ordinary, flawed, and perfect in its simplicity. You close your eyes, lulled by the thought, the theater was never just marble stages or famous names, but farmers, sailors, women, and children playing pretend beneath starlit vines. By morning, you find yourself climbing a broad, stony road that leads into the heart of a city that smells of roasted barley and fresh-cut pine. The cart bumps along, donkeys steady as ever, until stone walls rise ahead, towers pricking the sky, and a wide gate welcomes you in. This is Athens, or at least a city much like it in your dream-heavy mind where Dionysus' wandering rituals begin to grow roots. The streets hum with traffic. Merchants pushing carts, children chasing each other with clay toys, women balancing water jars like head-borne crowns. You trail behind the troupe as they weave toward a sacred precinct. The god's presence is subtle, disguised as always, but the people recognize him anyway. Ivy wreaths appear in windows. Priests carry little statues toward an altar shaded by fig trees. A herald shouts about the upcoming festival, voice echoing off the stones. Already, the city seems to change its rhythm for him, shifting into performance mode. The wagon that served as a stage in villages now looks almost quaint amid marble colonnades, but Dionysus doesn't mind. The city will build bigger stages soon enough. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In Athens, the Great Dionysia, or City Dionysia, became one of the most significant festivals, where playwrights like Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides premiered their works in front of thousands. It wasn't just entertainment, it was a civic duty tied to democracy, religion, and community identity. Historians still argue whether the festival was primarily about worshiping the god or about showcasing the city's cultural power. You can feel both debates vibrating under your sandals as you step into the theater precinct. Quirky tidbit? The procession to begin the festival included bringing a wooden statue of Dionysus from the countryside into the city, symbolically reenacting his arrival. Imagine a solemn parade of officials, choruses, and flute players escorting what is essentially a traveling figurine. You glance at the wagon still carrying props, and can't help but smirk. Dionysus really does love an entrance, whether in clay, wood, or flesh. The troupe pauses near the sanctuary. Workers are already preparing the great theater carved into a hillside stone, benches sweeping upward like a gray wave. You walk down into the orchestra, the circular dancing floor where choruses will stamp, spin, and shout. Your sandals crunch on gravel, and you hear your own echo bounce back, crisp and clear. This place was made for stories. Joke 1 unfolds when a satyr stands in the middle of the orchestra, cups his hands, and shouts, "Echo, echo." The stones reply, he grins, then adds, "Buy olives, buy olives." The theater dutifully echoes the advertisement, and suddenly half the troupe is chanting olives, until even the donkey brays along. A merchant leaning on the wall mutters, "Free marketing," and wanders off chuckling. The city buzzes with expectation. Citizens pour in from surrounding demes, wearing their best cloaks, clutching coins for food, eager for the week-long spectacle. The theater is not just for elites, though. The best seats are reserved for officials at a civic event, open to anyone who can squeeze onto the stone benches. You picture bakers, soldiers, sailors, even foreigners, craning for a view, all joined in the shared ritual of story. Historians still argue whether theater at this scale was more about art or politics. Was it truly the god's gift to mortals, or a carefully orchestrated display of Athenian superiority? As you sit in the cool shade of a column, you decide it hardly matters. To the ordinary people humming with anticipation, it's simply both, sacred and civic, playful and profound. Joke 2 arises during rehearsal, when the chorus tries to march in unison but can't decide which foot to start on. Half begin left, half begin right, and within seconds they collapse into a tangle of robes. Dionysus shakes his head, amused, and claps out the beat until they untangle themselves. Dignity, mostly intact. You smile, thinking some traditions like bad group choreography never die. The air fills with preparations. Carpenters hammering stage props, priests chanting, vendors shouting about honey cakes, actors muttering lines under their breath. You slip among them, watching how ritual and theater overlap seamlessly. The altar to Dionysus gleams with offerings, jars of wine, garlands of ivy, a pair of little goat figurines. Beyond it, the stage rises, already draped with linen to catch the imagination. Quirky tidbit again. The earliest plays may have had only 1 or 2 actors speaking, with the chorus carrying the bulk of the performance. The idea of 3 actors, so obvious now, was once a revolutionary innovation. You picture a city gasping as a third person suddenly enters a scene, complicating everything. You laugh softly at the thought, plot twist, ancient edition. As night falls, torches circle the theater, painting the stone benches gold. The wagon is rolled aside, no longer needed for makeshift stages. The city has built something sturdier, but you feel a pang of fondness for it. Without that squeaky cart, these stone seats might never have been carved. Theater began rolling and only later sat down. Joke 3 comes as the donkey, freed from pulling the wagon, clambers onto the orchestra floor and refuses to leave. The chorus, quick on their feet, bows to it as the spirit of stubborn endurance. The audience already gathering for tomorrow applauds delighted. Somewhere a playwright mutters, "Should have written that into the script." You lean back against a cool marble step, eyelids heavy. The city hums like a hive preparing for dawn. Tomorrow, tragedy and comedy will share the stage. Masks will amplify voices. Choruses will stamp dust into the air. And citizens will laugh, cry, and maybe argue about politics disguised as myth. But for now, it is quiet. The donkey munches hay, and you drift in the gentle thought that Dionysus has given the city not just wine and revelry, but a stage large enough for everyone's story. Morning rinses the theater in a pale wash, and you drift into your seat as though the stone itself is a pillow, someone politely warmed in the sun. The wagon is tucked to the side like a retired tutor. The city's theater breathes steady, ready. A hush moves through the tiers, and you can almost hear the air decide to become story. Dionysus lingers near the altar with that easy, sidelong smile as if he is the only one who already knows how the play ends, and isn't in a hurry to tell. Tragedy, you realize, blossoms best when everyone leans forward at once. You lean forward. The chorus files in first, robes brushing the dust into gentle clouds. Their feet find a pulse the city recognizes, a ritual beat that held villages together long before marble remembered it. Their voices rise in that older form you've been following since the rhododendrons slowed and chiseled, him taught to speak in sentences. The masks are sober now, eyebrows furrowed, mouths carved wide enough to hold grief without spilling. You feel the temperature in your chest drop a few degrees, like the moment before a summer storm, when the wind learns new manners. Here's your mainstream historical fact, set carefully on the altar of your attention by the 5th century BCE. Playwrights in Athens sculpted tragedy into a public art with rules and risks. Aeschylus expanded the drama by adding a second speaking actor, tugging authority away from the chorus. Sophocles later brought in a third, multiplying choices and consequences on stage. Historians still argue whether this shift was a natural evolution from ritual or a daring innovation sparked by civic competition. Either way, you watch the space between chorus and actors fill with electricity, room enough for decisions to bruise. The first actor steps forward, voice sounding older than the hills, and names a king you know from rumor. The story isn't a surprise. Tragedy rarely is. It's a mirror held so close you see the parts of your face you usually ignore. The chorus listens with you, then answers not as cheerleaders but as a town concerned, gossipy, wise in the way crowds are wise. You are inside the weather of a city's conscience, and it is oddly soothing. Like the donkey's steady bray back on the road, the chorus keeps time, reminding everyone to breathe. Joke 1 peeks in, soft as a fig seed between teeth. A boy behind you whispers, "Wake me if the gods throw lightning," and his grandmother taps his knee and mutters, "That's what the thunder-resistant blanket is for." You smile into your sleeve, grateful the city secretly remembers our little roadshow mascot. Words turn like millstones. A messenger arrives. A queen makes a choice. The chorus folds grief into syllables that land as gently as falling ash. You study the masks again, and notice how tragedy uses distance to get closer. The carved face removes the actor's private features so the audience can pour themselves in, like water finding a hollow. It's the same trick you felt on the road, only now sharpened to an ache. A fringe or quirky tidbit floats to you on the breeze that cools the orchestra. Some say the actors rubbed oil on their masks to make them. Catch torchlight better at dusk, a practical gloss that turned faces into lanterns of emotion. You can believe it. When the sun tilts, the cheekbones glow. When a line breaks, the mouth holds the light a fraction longer, as if each vowel were a wick. The action tightens. Second actor enters, and with him, a choice that can't be recalled. You feel the audience tilt every spine a meter needle. The god does not intervene. Dionysus, that patient patron of the stage, is content to be the floor underneath the story, the vine up which the plot climbs. Historians still argue whether tragedy was essentially religious, an offering of ordered grief to a god who may specialized in disordered joy, or whether it was a civic instrument for thinking in public. You sit between those positions like a careful hinge, swinging quietly with each scene. Joke 2 arrives like a kindness from the universe. In the solemn hush, a vendor's amphora squeaks as he tries to set it down silently. The chorus turns, perfectly in character, and without breaking meter chants a single aside that could mean hush the jar. The vendor blushes and nods to the chorus as though he's just been cast in the play. The city stifles giggles. Even in tragedy, fellowship survives. Aeschylus' ghost, if he's haunting the upper tiers, must be pleased. The dialogue now is flint. The chorus is tinder. Everywhere sparks of recognition. You feel it when the king insists on the logic that will undo him, and again when the queen refuses the safety that was never safety. Tragedy isn't about surprises. It's about the lullaby of inevitability, the relief of being guided through the worst by a hand that knows the way. The chorus swings into a stasamon, voices braided, and you think of the satyrs asleep under the cart, of the fishermen who sang to fish, of the donkey that learned to keep time. All those roadside rehearsals were seeds. This is the trellis. There is a pause in which even dust forgets to float. Then the messenger returns bearing news no one wants. You notice, with the slow curiosity of a mind growing drowsy, that the theater has devices for such moments. A doorway through which fate conveniently enters. A small platform, the ekaklima, that can roll out a tableau from inside the skin when showing is gentler than telling. Historians still argue whether audiences preferred grief tidied behind the facade or flung into the orchestra like a storm. The city today seems grateful for distance. The tableau speaks softly and is heard. You take another breath and taste olive smoke, and a hint of wine watered just sowed the Athenian way. Equal parts pleasure and policy. Out of the corner of your eye, Dionysus tilts his head, listening like a teacher who lets the lesson teach itself. Tragedy in his house is not grim punishment. It is careful gardening. Sorrow is pruned into shape so it will not overrun the courtyard. Joke 3 tiptoes in, loud because the gods enjoy small mercies. A child up in the cheap seats, too young to track the plot, whispers, "When do they say figs?" His father squeezes his hand and says, "After we listen." And so they do. The end, when it arrives, is quiet. The chorus does not scream. It folds the city back into itself, a blanket smoothed over a restless sleeper. The actors bow still masked, still larger than their names, and you feel the audience exhale in one long neighborly sigh. The priest lifts a small cup at the altar. The god statue watches with wooden patience. The donkey outside the gates, you are certain, chooses this exact moment to bray once on pitch. You stand slowly, calves tingling from stone steps, mind strangely lighter for carrying something heavy with so many others. The wagon waits where we left it, its wheels dusty, its curtain folded like a promise. Tragedy has blossomed, no longer a roadside vine, but an espaliered tree against the city's wall. trained to bear fruit in public. You run a thumb over the small chip in your own borrowed mask and think how sorrow, handled gently, becomes a kind of sleep aid. The chorus murmurs a final blessing to the air. The crowd disperses. You drift after them, feeling the god's amused presence at your shoulder, as if to say, "See, you survived this one. Barely, but you did." The sun slides lower across the marble slopes, and the city exhales, weary from weeping in unison. But grief, like wine, must be balanced with laughter, at least, with something absurd enough to make the body remember its lighter muscles. So the chorus returns to the orchestra, their masks swapped, their robes hiked up, and their feet stomping out a rhythm so jaunty it sounds like mischief itself. Dionysus leans back against a column, arms folded, smirk widening. You feel it too. The moment when tragedy's solemn weight tips, and comedy strolls in, tripping over its own sandals. Here's your mainstream historical fact, to tuck under your arm like a spare amphora. Comedy developed alongside tragedy at the Dionysian festivals, with playwrights like Aristophanes turning satire into civic sport. His plays mocked politicians, philosophers, even the audience itself. Historians still argue whether comedy was licensed, misbehavior tolerated only for the holiday, or whether it served as a vital safety valve for democracy laughter as a form of public debate. You see both possibilities in the way this chorus leans forward, already looking for their next target. The quirky tidbit comes in the form of props, inflated leather bladders tied under tunics, oversized masks with bulging eyes, and DS costumes, padded in ways that leave nothing to the imagination. You stifle a laugh. This isn't subtle parody. This is humor painted in strokes so wide it can be seen from the city walls. The first comic scene begins with a satyr pretending to be a famous general. His helmet is too large, his spear droops sadly, and his lines dissolve into a complaint about taxes. The chorus joins in, stomping in mock despair about war draining the wine supply. The audience howls, and you catch sight of an actual general in the front row trying not to smile. Civic satire, it turns out, works best when everyone recognizes the joke. Joke one sneaks in with a prop mishap. The satyr's spear wobbles, then collapses entirely, revealing it to be nothing but a broom handle with ivy wrapped around it. Without missing a beat, he declares, "Even my spear has deserted me." The chorus echoes the line in chorus, and the crowd bursts out laughing. The donkey from earlier wanders near the orchestra, lured by leftover figs, and someone shouts, "Give it a mask." The boy obliges, fastening the wide-eyed comic mask we saw last night onto its face. The donkey blinks, chews, and suddenly becomes the unintentional star of the play. The audience cheers louder for the animal than for the actors. You shake your head, grinning, thinking. Some things never change. Audiences always love an animal cameo. Joke 2, delivered courtesy of hooves. Historians still argue whether comedy at these festivals was primarily for catharsis or for control. Was it just about mocking authority so everyone could go home appeased? Or was it truly daring, poking holes in civic pride where tragedy could not? Tonight, watching the crowd roar as politicians' quirks are parodied, you feel the sharp edge under the laughter. Comedy is a softer mask for sharper truths. The quirky tidbit hums again. Some scholars say the choruses in comedy occasionally mimicked animals' frogs. Birds, wasps turning the orchestra into a miniature zoo. You imagine a chorus of croaking frogs bouncing rhythmically, echoing across marble. And you almost laugh aloud at the thought of an entire city solemnly applauding amphibians. The performance continues. A mock trial where a satyr plays both judge and accused, swapping masks mid-sentence. A parody of a myth where Heracles forgets his lines and instead recites a shopping list to loaves. One wineskin, sandals without holes. A chorus that dances backward, tripping into each other but insisting it is the new fashion. The crowd is breathless with laughter, tears replaced by hiccups of joy. Joke 3 arrives when a comic actor, dressed as a pompous philosopher, begins a speech about the mysteries of the cosmos. He gets as far as in the beginning, there was before a satyr interrupts with a nap. The chorus collapses on the ground, pretending to snore, and the audience applauds thunderously. You catch Dionysus himself chuckling, shaking his head as though proud of the irreverence. You realize as you watch that comedy is not an afterthought to tragedy, but its sibling. Where tragedy prunes grief into order, comedy lets joy run wild in the vineyard. Both belong to Dionysus, who teaches balance not through discipline, but through excess, too much sorrow and too much laughter, until the world feels level again. As the play winds down, the chorus sings a bawdy farewell hymn, masks grinning in torchlight. The audience files out, still laughing, repeating lines back and forth as though quoting scripture. The donkey, mask askew, is led back to the wagon, braying as if taking a bow. You stretch, feeling the pleasant ache of laughter in your ribs, and step away from the theater. The night air tastes of figs and lamp smoke, lighter than it did after tragedy. Somewhere behind you, the chorus lingers, still humming, and the city hums with them. You smile, drowsy now. It's realizing that the gods' greatest trick might not be wine at all, but laughter that helps mortals survive themselves. You shuffle along the stone steps as the crowd drifts out of the theater, voices buzzing like bees fat on nectar. But not all the laughter is harmless. As you trail Dionysus and his troupe through the agora, you overhear citizens repeating lines that sounded like jokes, but felt sharper under the skin. A fishmonger imitates the comic actor's bumbling general, and a group of sailors chuckle knowingly to knowingly. You catch a magistrate's frown, quickly smoothed into a smile. Comedy has teeth, even when hidden under a drunken mask. The troupe pauses at a fountain, and Dionysus leans casually against the marble rim. He's not gloating. He's waiting. He knows that theater is more than singing and dancing. It's politics disguised as play. And tonight, the city has been reminded that its leaders are human enough to trip over their sandals, just like satyrs. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Greek comedy often carried bold political commentary. Aristophanes lampooned Cleon the politician so directly that it shocked the assembly, yet audiences loved it. Historians still argue whether these plays genuinely shaped political opinion, or simply gave citizens a safe outlet to laugh at the powerful. You sip from the fountain, cool water easing your throat, and imagine what it must feel like to be mocked in front of thousands, yet unable to stop it. The quirky tidbit comes when you learn that comic choruses sometimes paraded through the city after performances, singing verses that poked fun at officials. Imagine leaving your house for bread only to hear a chorus of men dressed as birds chanting about your lazy legislation. Awkward? Yes. Effective? Possibly. Joke 1 lands in the agora as a satyr, still in costume, shouts toward a tax collector. "Good sir, I dropped my coin purse. Could you lend me mine back?" The crowd erupts in laughter, and the tax collector, caught between pride and embarrassment, bows graciously. The air smells of grilled fish and lamp oil as torches are lit around the square. Citizens gather in knots, rehashing the play with as much fervor as tomorrow's market prices. You lean against a column, noticing how quickly lines have already become catchphrases. A boy mimics the pompous philosophers in the beginning, and his friends all chorus, "A nap." In unison, it is both funny and unsettling how easily stories can become slogans. Historians still argue whether comedy strengthened democracy by encouraging critique or undermined it by reducing complex issues to punchlines. You watch a group of men debating whether the satirical trial scene was truly about legal reforms or just cheap humor. One swears the playwright was slyly warning against corruption. Another insists it was nothing more than an excuse for fart jokes. You suspect the truth sits somewhere in the middle, sipping watered wine. Joke 2 appears when the donkey, evidently craving attention after its starring role, nudges the fountain until it spills over. A chorus boy quips, "Even the donkey thirsts for justice." And the crowd applauds the animal like a seasoned orator. The poor beast brays, ears twitching, unaware it has become a political symbol. The quirky tidbit drifts in again. Some fragments suggest that comic actors occasionally wore costumes so exaggerated they resembled caricatures of real leaders, complete with padded bellies or distinctive wigs. Imagine Aristophanes dressing an actor to look unmistakably like Socrates, then ridiculing him on stage as a lazy philosopher. Oh wait, he did. You grin sleepily at the audacity of it. The city seems restless now, laughter cooling into mutters. You wander past stalls, closing for the night, noticing graffiti scratched hastily into a wall. A caricature of a politician with donkey ears. You chuckle, but also wonder if the politician will laugh tomorrow. Joke 3 arrives in the form of a chorus member who, still half in costume, climbs onto a barrel and proclaims, "Tonight, we freed the people." Tomorrow, we free the tavern. The crowd cheers, then disperses toward taverns anyway. You can't help but laugh. Liberation is apparently thirsty work. Dionysus watches, amused but knowing. He doesn't need to meddle. The plays have already done their work. The people carry laughter home in their pockets, but also questions they cannot quite ignore. Was the general truly so bumbling? Are taxes too high? Is philosophy secretly just an excuse for naps? And you feel the gods' quiet satisfaction? This is theater not only for sleep and song, but for democracy, smuggled in under the guise of comedy. You drift into the night with the troupe, stars sharp above agora, quieter now. The donkey plods faithfully, occasionally glancing at the graffiti as if proud of its new reputation. You yawn, stretch, and realize how political satire has always walked the line between lullaby and alarm bell. Under Dionysus's gaze, even jokes can be sacred. The city fades behind you, its echoes of laughter and sorrow dissolving into the night air. Dionysus does not linger long in one place. He is a wanderer by nature, and soon you find yourself trudging toward the coast. The wagon creaks as usual, loaded with masks and props, and the donkey flicks its ears at the salty breeze. Ahead, a line of ships waits, sails furled, ropes creaking like sleepy throats. Dionysus gestures, and suddenly you are boarding, the stage on wheels becoming cargo for a voyage. The deck smells of tar, pitch, and wine. Of course, wine, the sailor's eye. The troupe suspiciously at first, then smile when handed a jug. Soon the chorus is sprawled across the deck, swapping verses with the crew, their sandals slapping rhythms against the planks. As the anchor lifts, the horizon shimmers like a stage curtain, and you sail with the god toward new shores. Here's your mainstream historical fact. The cult of Dionysus did not remain confined to Greece. It spread widely to Thrace, to Asia Minor, even into Egypt, and eventually Rome, morphing into the Bacchic rites. His worship traveled like vines carried by wind and sea, adaptable, irresistible. Historians still argue whether the cult spread was driven by Greek colonization, by merchants eager for trade, or by the inherent allure of ecstatic ritual. Watching the troops sing across the waves, you think it may have been all three, the quirky tidbit. Some ancient accounts describe foreign rulers welcoming Dionysus' followers with both fascination and suspicion. In India, legends say, he marched with an army of satyrs and women wielding thyrsi, spreading vines wherever they camped. Whether myth or metaphor, you can picture startled locals waking to find grape leaves curling overnight around their gates. Joke 1 arrives on deck when a satyr, attempting to help with the rigging, tangles himself in the ropes. Dangling upside down, he calls out, "Behold, I am the figurehead." The sailors laugh so hard they nearly drop the sail, and Dionysus himself claps as though this were part of the performance. The sea rocks gently, turning the deck into another kind of stage. The chorus adapts, swaying to the rhythm of the waves, singing hymns that blur into sea shanties. You join in, though your voice wobbles with the tide. The masks are pulled out again, their painted eyes staring into the foam. You watch as the sailors slip them on, hesitant at first, then bolder. Soon, a grizzled helmsman is delivering lines as a tragic king, while his mate plays the chorus, their laughter cutting through the spray. Historians still argue whether these cultic performances were genuine conversions or just entertainments for weary travelers. Did the foreign sailors truly worship Dionysus, or were they merely enjoying free theater with a side of wine? You shrugged. Either way, the god seems pleased. Joke to surfaces when the donkey, seasick, leans dramatically over the side. A satyr pats its back, solemnly chanting, "Sing, mighty sea beast, sing." The donkey brays pitifully, and the chorus answers in harmony. The sailors double over, declaring it the best music of the voyage. The ship makes landfall at a bustling port in Asia Minor. The air shifts spices, resin, incense, languages tangled together. Dionysus steps off the gangplank like a man returning home, though he's never been here before. Merchants pause, then join the procession, intrigued by the music and masks. Soon the wagon is rolling again, this time through streets lined with carved lions and tiled courtyards. You hear strange accents blending with Greek refrains, the chorus absorbing new words like a sponge. The quirky tidbit slips in. Inscriptions from foreign cities show Dionysian clubs forming, local elites sponsoring plays and rituals, sometimes blending with their own deities. A god of wine was not difficult to welcome. He was adaptable, slipping into new costumes as easily as a mask. You picture him smiling as Egyptian priests poured him into Osiris's robes, or as Roman Bacchus adopted the toga without complaint. Joke 3. Glimmers in a foreign market. A satyr points at a local fruit stand, mistakes pomegranates for oversized grapes. Declares triumphantly, "The god has blessed this land with wine already made," bites into one, seeds spraying everywhere, and sputters. The chorus erupts in laughter, improvising a hymn to the sour vintage of the East. Night falls again, this time under foreign stars. You sit by the wagon, lantern swinging gently, and watch as strangers mingle with satyrs, nymphs, and villagers, all clapping to the same beat. Dionysus stands at the center, a god who never sits still, a patron whose theater rolls not only across roads but across seas. His cult spreads like vines, sometimes wild, sometimes cultivated, always unstoppable. The donkey snores beside you, sailors hum in languages you half understand, and the masks lie in a heap, waiting for tomorrow's show. You close your eyes, lulled by the rhythm of waves still echoing in your bones, comforted by the thought that even oceans cannot keep a good story from traveling. The music grows quieter as the road bends into cypress shade. Lanterns are hooded, voices drop, and even the donkey seems to understand this part requires softer hooves. You follow the troop away from the market-esque chatter and into a grove that smells of resin and damp earth. The masks are wrapped in cloth. The thunder-resistant blanket becomes, for tonight, a dignified altar cover. Dionysus turns once to be sure you're still with him, then slips through a gap in the trees into a clearing ringed with stones. The air feels cooler here, as if the ground remembers secrets. You do too, by instinct. Breathe slower, step lighter. Let curiosity move like a cat in tall grass. A few figures arrive by different paths, each carrying something smaller. A sprig of ivy, a shallow dish of water, a twist of wool. No proclamations, no drums, only the hush of people who agree not to speak names. You sense a change in the familiar troop. Satyrs straighten spines, chorus members lower eyes, and the god himself seems less host, more horizon. Tonight is not the street festival or the rickety road show. Tonight belongs to the mysteries, the whispering branch of his worship, the side that keeps its best stories folded. Here's your mainstream historical fact, placed gently like a cup on a midnight table. Across the Greek world and beyond, Dionysian groups, Theoso held private rites and initiations, with passwords, symbols, and nocturnal ceremonies that promise participants a different way of belonging, sometimes even a brighter hope for the soul. We know this from inscriptions that list members, from texts that hint and dodge, and from neighboring traditions. Orphic circles that show how secrecy could be a kind of sacred architecture. Historians still argue whether Dionysian initiation focused on personal salvation, communal ecstasy, or simply the deep bonding of shared ritual. You stand in the clearing and feel all three possibilities leaning in. You're led to a basin where water reflects lantern glow like moons caught in shallow bowls. A woman with ivy braided into her hair pours a trickle over your hands. She says nothing, but you understand. Leave the dust of markets behind. Another places a thin wreath lightly on your brow. Vines never weigh heavy in these ceremonies. They invite rather than press. A chorus member you recognize from the comic play carries a small bundle that smells of herbs and clean wool. He tucks it beneath the blanket on the stone, and you realize how icily props become sacraments when intention changes. Joke 1 tiptoes into the scene without breaking the spell. As the wreath is adjusted, a single ivy leaf flops over your eye. You blink, cross-eyed and solemn, and the priestess lifts it like a courteous hairstylist. The god prefers both eyes open, she whispers, amused. You nod, the leaf restored to dignity, and the circle hides small smiles like fireflies in their cheeks. The rite begins not with spectacle, but with stories told as if they were lullabies. The twice-born god, the places called Nysa, that keep multiplying like reflections in still water, the kindness of vines that climb whatever will hold them. Soft drum keeps time. You recognize some of the images from the road that caves humid hush. The donkey's stubborn beat, the cart's draped curtain now serving as altar cloth, and feel the comfort of continuity. The public play and the private mystery grow from the same rootstock. A bowl is lifted. Wine is mixed with water, always with water, and passed without hurry. You taste it the way you would listen to a secret, attentive, grateful, a little astonished that something simple can feel ceremonial when everyone agrees to slow down. A phrase is spoken, not a grand password, but a gentle exchange of recognition, like the handshake of people who share a task rather than a conspiracy. The ground hums under your feet, or maybe that's your own heartbeat softening into the drum. Quirky tidbit floats in on the same breath. In graves from southern Italy and elsewhere, archaeologists have found tiny gold tablets, thin, lamellae inscribed with instructions for the soul, sometimes in Orphic verse, guiding the dead past, confusing springs, teaching them what to say to the keepers below. Some of those lines speak of purity and of having flown out of the sorrowful circle. Whether every tablet belongs to Dionysus' orbit or to cousins in the mystery family, the shimmering slips suggest how seriously some initiates took the promise that ritual could change a journey no audience ever sees. You imagine a tablet like a folded sun tucked against a rib, the quietest cheat sheet ever written. The circle shifts. A song rises, simple enough for your sleepy mouth to learn in 2 hearings, deep enough to sound older than the road. You sway with the others, nothing frantic. Only the sort of gentle rocking you've seen a mother give to a child to content to fully sleep. Ivy rustles like silk. Somewhere beyond the trees, an owl trades syllables with the chorus. No one minds the owl's improvisations. Mysteries make generous accompanists. Historians still argue whether the trance or mania associated with Dionysus was literal possession, practice technique, or metaphor for communal loosening. Tonight, you sense deliberately softened edges rather than storm. The rite keeps to a narrow path of calm, the way a river widens without flooding. The priestess voice threads through the song, not leading so much as weaving. When she pauses, the silence holds like a shared inhale. Joke 2 arrives, affectionate as a nudge. At the edge of the clearing, the donkey has laid its head on the folded thunder blanket, eyes half closed, ears erect, as if attending a lecture. Satyr leans over and whispers, "Look, the hierophant of hay." The priestess hides a grin. The animal sighs theatrically, and you decide this must be the most pious pillow in Greece. A small drama unfolds at the center, silent as moonlight. A mask is lifted not to be worn, but to be shown. Its expression is neither tragic nor comic. It is simply serene. The priestess turns it slowly so each person can see their own reflection blurred in the lacquered surface. You glimpse yourself not as audience or actor, but as breathing proof that stories can loosen knots you forgot you tied. When the mask is veiled again, the drum changes to a heartbeat you did not know you were sharing. There is one moment brief. Careful when the group enacts a memory of the god's arrivals and returns. A ritual of stepping out of the ring and back in, like walking through 2 different doors of the same house. No frenzy, no spectacle, only the sort of choreography that tucks meaning under repetition. You step, you re-enter, and everything seems lightly repainted, as if someone cleaned the air while you were looking at your feet. A second cup is passed, this one sweetened with honey. Taste carries a reminder. Pleasure belongs here without apology, tempered by water, steadied by song. The priestess speaks of balance, the vine that climbs, and the stake that steadies it, the chorus that wanders, and the beat that gathers it home. The mysteries do not promise a life without sorrow. They promise a company that knows how to carry it. Joke 3 is a whisper traded around the circle after the second sip. Someone stage whispers. Password for the next gate is figs, right? A ripple of suppressed laughter travels like a breeze. The priestess lets it pass. In this house, running gags are within reason welcomed guests. At the edge of the firelight, a traveler from far inland shows a small amulet etched with a vine and a star. He says little, his presence says enough. The cult has a way of crossing borders without kicking doors. Wine shared, songs shared. The feeling of being allowed to belong without a test harsher than kindness. You think of the Roman edict you've heard rumored far away, the stern Senate that once tried to regulate Bacchic rites. Fearful of secret gatherings after darkened, you realize mysteries look different depending on who holds the lantern. Here, the light is soft, the circle small, the rules explicit. Respect, measure. Return safely to your household at dawn. The right sinks toward stillness. A final blessing is spoken not in thunder, but in drowsy unanimity. The blanket is folded, the basin emptied into the roots of a cypress, the wreaths laid on the stones to brown with dignity. People leave in pairs or threes, shoes in hand so the path can keep the secret of their steps. The donkey stretches, sniffs the cypress, and decides faith tastes like bark. You make a note to add that to our theology of snacks. When the grove is quiet again, Dionysus looks at you the way a teacher checks whether the lesson has softened a stubborn thought. You feel lighter, not with intoxication, but with alignment, like a cart whose wheels were just greased. The mysteries did not shout, they hummed. They didn't erase the world's edges, they gently rounded them, so you can sleep without snagging on splinters. You step back onto the path with the others, carrying nothing obvious, and somehow, everything. A little moonlight pools in the old footprints. Somewhere, future scholars will debate what exactly happened here. You can only say that the night learned to breathe with you, and you with it. The wagon waits, quiet as a held cup, and the road begins again. Dawn finds the grove emptied and the road patient again, and you walk out with the troop as if leaving a dream by the same door you entered. Dionysus gestures toward the horizon, not to a single city, but 2 centuries stacked like scenery flat sand. You step through time the way you've been stepping through olive shade and torchlit squares. The wagon creaks. Apparently even metaphors ride on axles. Pass a shoreline where our ship once rocked, and then the water becomes years. Empires rising and folding, languages trading vowels, stages, learning new shapes. The god walks beside you with that sideways smile, as if to say, watch how far a rolling play can travel. Your sandals touch cobbles that aren't Greek anymore. The chorus hum, has changed into hymns dressed as dialogue. And you're suddenly in a medieval town square where guilds roll pageant wagons into place. A carpenter's cart opens into Noah's workshop. A baker's cart becomes a manger. The cloth dyers unfurl a painted sky on canvas. You recognize the trick immediately. The theater on wheels is back. Only the costumes have learned church colors. Here, your mainstream historical fact. The great Corpus Christi cycles in parts of medieval. Europe used pageant wagons, portable stages parked along procession routes to play out sacred stories. With craftspeople sponsoring episodes and actors drawn from the local crowd, historians still argue whether these cycles grew straight from liturgical drama or from street traditions that simply borrowed church calendars and tone. You stand near a wagon's edge and feel the continuity in your calves. A wheel squeaks. You smile. Of course it does. Quirky tidbit drops like confetti from a canvas sky. Some productions used a hellmouth, a painted dragon's jaw contraption that opened to swallow sinners in a puff of theatrical smoke. The town children scream in delighted terror. The older folks clap at the clever carpentry. You privately rate the special effect to amphory and a fig. Joke 1 arrives when a volunteer demon loses a shoe climbing the hellmouth ladder, waves it like a trophy, and crows, "Behold, the soul lost." The chorus of bakers groans appreciatively, then hands him a roll as hazard pay. The wheel turns again. Your feet step onto wooden planks that spring just enough to tell you they're honest boards, and a thatched oculus above poor sunlight on a round stage. You recognize the globe, even if the sign hasn't been painted yet. And you hear a different chorus, groundlings trading barbs, fruit sellers advertising in verse, a trumpet blares, and actors stride out with a confidence you've seen in satyrs and fishermen alike. The masks are gone, but the exaggeration survives in words. You lean against the stage rail. The wood is warm, the language warmer. A player in a crown confides to the audience like a friend with news, and you feel the same intimacy the wagon once perfected. It's a sense that the performer can see you personally and will forgive you for nodding off between soliloquies. Here's another mainstream touchstone. Shakespeare loved the chorus as both narrator and conscience, a remnant of Greek practice reframed for a London crowd. When the chorus in Henry V begs the audience to piece out our imperfections with your thoughts, you hear the old cooperation, imagination as a portable stage. Historians still argue whether the Elizabethan theater consciously inherited Greek dramaturgy or simply rediscovered similar solutions. Direct address, masked types translated into stock figures verse as a unifying beat. You decide the lineage is less about documents and more about habits. People gathered need an agreed rhythm for pretending. Joke 2 tiptoes across the boards. A prop boy enters with a letter that is very obviously last week's playbill, flips it over mid-scene, and keeps reading. An actor improvises. The news is freshly recycled, and the pit laughs with the pleasure of being caught in the game. You chuckle, remembering the fisherman who sang to fish. Theater forever forgives the wrong prop when the right charm shows up. A time softens again, and the chorus you hear is now a full company of voices stacked in harmony. You've drifted into opera's birth, where members of the Florentine Camerata try to resurrect Greek tragedy as sung speech and accidentally invent a new obsession. A harpsichord nods to the past. A castrato lifts a line like a silver wire. A stage machine rolls a cloud on cue. Another mainstream fact settles gently. Early opera, from Peri and Monteverdi onward, was a deliberate experiment to revive the power of ancient drama by making music carry argument. Historians still argue whether they understood Greek theater correctly or beautifully misunderstood it into something different. Either way, you feel the thrill of a chorus that can drown doubt with tone. Quirky tidbits sparkles from a chandelier. In some opera houses, 19th century impresarios hired claques, paid applauders who could coax ovations on schedule. Imagine a satyr with a stopwatch leading bravos like a drill sergeant. You grin, marketing by chorus ancient in spirit, if not in wage slips. And because this is our traveling tradition, joke 3 saunters in when a tenor-s wig slips during a high note and lands like a sleeping cat on the maestro's head. The orchestra doesn't miss a beat, and afterward the maestro keeps the wig as a lucky talisman. You suspect the thunder-resistant blanket would approve. Now you pass through gaslit boulevards, circuses, and striped tents. Vaudeville bills stacked higher than a fig crate, and a caravan of wagons that absolutely refuses to retire. You glance at a poster. A traveling troupe advertising miracles of mechanic light and moving pictures. The wagon has learned to project. On a temporary screen, a train rushes at the audience. People flinch, laugh, then clap for the illusion they did not believe, and believed anyway. The god looks pleased. New mask. Same trick. A final bend in the road brings you into our era, where a truck unfolds into a stage in a park. A flatbed becomes a concert. A city street closes for a festival where strangers sing together, while their dogs politely critique the tempo. You think of pageant wagons, of the donkey made a star by a borrowed mask, the fisherman's dithyramb, of the village goat chewing a prop and becoming an oracle. The line is unbroken not because scholars can trace every mile, but because your bones recognize the bounce of boards underfoot and the shared inhale before a story starts. Here, a last pocket fact to set among your memories. Road shows in the 19th and 20th centuries literally traveled plays and musicals from city to city. Testing and tuning before Broadway or the West End welcomed them. Theaters on wheels stayed in spirit even when the wheels had engines. Historians still argue whether this persistence proves Dionysus' cult left a structural legacy, or whether it proves that humans simply love any excuse to gather, to move, and to pretend together. You choose both, as usual, and add a quiet third option. It proves that sleep comes easier when someone trustworthy tells a story in the key of breath. The god, who has been letting you narrate like a kind producer, tips his head toward the wagon one more time. The curtain is folded, the masks tucked in their chest, the thunder-resistant blanket washed and aired for the next rain-shaped plot twist. Somewhere in the bottom of the prop box, a scribbled sign still reads figs, in a child's hand, ready for another road, another chorus, another lucky mistake that turns into tradition. You pat the side of the cart, creaks back like an old friend. And because you've earned one last gentle boast, you probably wouldn't last a day keeping this whole parade moving, the carpentry, the diplomacy, the snacks.
Ow.
But you don't have to. You only need to listen, to breathe with the crowd, to let the wheels turn in your imagination. Dionysus waves you onward, and you realize we've been on his theater on wheels all night, trolling through eras, picking up passengers, and setting them gently down at their doors. Word count: 1,080, wind down 300 words. You ease back from the bright edges of stages and squares, letting the cymbals fade, letting the board stop bouncing beneath your feet. The wagon grows smaller, as if you're rewatching it from a quiet hillside where grass leans in the same direction as your thoughts. Torches blur into fireflies, then into the slow blink of far-off windows, then only into the soft suggestion of warmth. You draw a longer breath, and it feels like a curtain lowering without hurry, cloth settling into calm folds. You can still hear it if you want to. A chorus practicing the vowel that sounds most like a lullaby. The donkey choosing perfect time for one last polite note. A priestess setting a basin back among the roots, water folding into soil with the sound of silk. The mask in your hands grows lighter, and then it is only your own face, unburdened, warmed by the idea that stories travel so you don't have to. Each road turns into a hallway in your house. Each festival becomes a late conversation with someone who knows how to end a night kindly. Let the names soften. Let the cities drift apart like boats untying from a dock. The god's smile is just a crescent now, barring the moon's shape, and he nods, satisfied that your breath has found a slower tempo. If you like, tuck the blanket. Yes, the thunder assistant one under your cheek. And imagine ivy tracing a gentle line across the ceiling, leaf by leaf, patient as sleep. No decisions are needed. The wagon will keep. The chorus will tidy the props. Your only task is to let the last applause become a hush, and the hush become the kind of quiet that remembers how to comfort. You are home. The stage is stored. The road is resting. Close your eyes. The wheels are still, and you are perfectly carried.